A list of all the participants should show up on your screen, ideally, and you should be at the top of that list. You hover over your name. You're going to click on a blue button that says rename. A little pop-up window should show up, and we're going to ask you to put your first, last name, and your organization. If you could rename that so we know who is here in the room with us. Also, we might have people that are in a room somewhere together. If you could type in the names of who is in that room with you in the chat box with their association, that would help us with attendance as well. And I am just really quickly see if there's anyone on a phone that just actually called in. I'm not seeing that. I don't think so. If that would happen, we would, because they cannot change, they're not on a computer, we would have to ask them to identify themselves and let us know who they are. So before we get into everything, I just want to make sure that you understand that this is being recorded. Every ECHO session is recorded and archived so that you who attended can refer back to, or you can share it with a colleague or a staff member, or for all the people that couldn't attend a session, they have an opportunity to gather the recording as well as any resources that was posted as well. The other thing I just want to mention is that an ECHO session really isn't intended to be a sit and get. We really want to build capacity, a support network, and that happens by having interactive discussion. We want you to ask questions. We want you to make comments. We want you to provide suggestions. And how you can do that is you can either use the raise hand button with the Zoom platform toolbar, or you can wave at us and get our attention and we'll give you the microphone, or you can put a question or a comment in the chat box. And we have individuals that are watching all of these things. So we don't want you to be shy. We want you to ask questions and make comments. That's what this is all about. Also, this is a product, and the future sessions that you're going to get familiar with is a product of many planning members working over the last couple months. These planning members are your colleagues across the state that have met every week, deciding on topics, determining presenters, learning about the project, and really trying to identify the needs of what we're trying to do here with this project. So some of you are in the virtual room, and I thank you for attending today. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Stock, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about the project as well as how we got here. And I'm going to share my screen so that he can...
While that slides are coming up from Carrie's computer, I just wanted to let you know that it's a partnership. So the ECHO project is a partnership of various groups. Those groups range from the Anchorage School District, which is serving a lot of the logistical help. So that's why Carrie and I are both employees of Anchorage School District. It's also a partnership with the Department of Education, and DEED is funding this through the ESSA funds that help provide leadership opportunities for our state. Also, we have a partnership with the University of Wyoming, and Wyoming has been one of the leaders in providing ECHO networks around the country, and especially those in education. Also partnering with us is the Alaska Council of School Administrators and the Superintendents Associations and Principals Associations have been helpful in trying to market and help support, push emails and things out to everyone. And so our network also has one more partner, and that is the University of Alaska. UAA also is running various ECHO projects, but all of theirs are in the area of medicine. Their most recent ECHO project is around the opioid crisis. And so you can see all of the partners there on the screen. So at the top of your page, you'll see a picture of something that looks a lot like our studio here. But on the left, that's Dr. Aurora from the University of New Mexico. And just to share briefly, the ECHO project stands for Extension of Community Health Outcomes, ECHO. And it was started in the University of New Mexico, and the purpose was to reduce deaths from hepatitis C. And what it does is it takes knowledge and moves it out to the people, as opposed to trying to bring people into centers of expertise at hospitals. And through bringing best practices to rural areas, they were able to make dramatic changes in health outcomes. So we've modified this for Alaska for education as well. We have a lot of rural areas that it's a big challenge for some of you to be able to network with your colleagues and your peers around Alaska. And so you'll see at the top, you'll see a hub, and you'll see these little spokes around the outside, and that represents you. So the hub represents a planning team that puts these project ideas together, and the spokes are all the folks who are online. And we have up to 40 people today already who are online, and you represent the spokes around Alaska. And down the bottom, you'll see just a screenshot that demos that. So there are 4 components to an ECHO project. And if you look at the blue box, it says using technology to leverage scarce resources. And so through this platform called Zoom, we bring you best practices in networking with colleagues and peers through technology. And so in our rural areas, it's amazing because it cuts down on travel costs. The next box says didactic training. Dr. Fischer has graciously agreed to help just kick off our project today. Many of you have heard Doug speak and have been so impressed with his work and his books, and he's been willing to serve as our kind of keynote kickoff to just explain how we can provide didactic training to you. They're short. All of them will be 20 to 30 minutes or a little longer depending on questions. And every single ECHO session in our networks will start that way. You'll also see case presentations and ongoing co-management. And that is a term that Carrie will talk about at the end when Doug is all finished with his presentation. And the last box is one of the most important. We measure outcomes with ECHO, and we have a very rigorous evaluation process. The folks who fund ECHO will be provided with a lot of evaluation detail over time that represents its impact. So those are the 4 components, and every ECHO project has to have those 4 pieces. And so last of all, I want to mention the 5 networks that ECHO will be providing. This one is a little bit of a hybrid. It's a kind of a one-off we did just because Dr. Fischer was so willing to help us kick it off. But once we get rolling, the 5 networks, one of them is around behavior, safety, and well-being, and that one is on Mondays from 10 to 11:15. We have another one that deals with graduation rates, and our focus there is to work with secondary schools in particular, those who may be below the 66 2/3 graduation rate, or those who just want to move towards the goal of getting 90% of our students to graduate. The third one, leadership and equity, is focused on the principalship. We have one on student reading on Wednesdays and one on early childhood focus. And Carrie will show you at the end how you can access every one of those networks and find out who the presenters are going to be for each of those sessions. So that's a little bit about how the network works. And now just to explain how a session works. Every ECHO session has the same model. We start the session 30 minutes early so we can test your mics and make sure we've got our presenters lined up. When we get started, Carrie will always do introductions, and we will go through some basic Zoom protocols. And then our brief didactic, 30 minutes or less, is a presenter from either a state, local, or national expert who's sharing something. And today we have Doug Fischer for our didactic. Following that is some form of a problem of practice. And here's where we are so different from a webinar. In this case, you get to talk to your peers. So one of you can volunteer to bring a problem of practice that you've been facing, and you can ask your peers for recommendations, strategies, or ideas. And then we'll finish with announcements. Every ECHO session follows this structure. And so that's it. So that's how ECHO came to be. It is funded by the state, and it's our first kickoff year this spring trying to engage. The grant goes for 2 years for now. And next year we'll be running all 12 or all 9 months of the school year. And we'll have lots of sessions planned, but this spring is sort of our kickoff marketing year of getting people excited about it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Fischer. So Doug Fischer is going to share his screen here, Dr. Fischer is an amazing presenter, an author, a speaker. He keynoted for Anchorage School District this year, and he is here to talk about building equity, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Fischer.
Well, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Notice that I'm wearing my Alaska shirt today, or sweatshirt today, because it's really cold where I am. It's 55, and we are freezing here. So thank you for joining me. So I thought I would talk a little bit about equity, and that's my website, fisherandfry.com. So you are welcome to follow up. If you want this exact PowerPoint, go on that website, hit contact, and tell me you want this PowerPoint. I'll reply with it. It's a really big file, so it'll be in Dropbox because of all the images. So I was asked as part of this echo, like, what am I currently thinking about? What am I, what's on my mind? And some colleagues and I have been really thinking about our work on equity and what we're doing in San Diego. And I hope we all are at the point where we realize that equality and equity are not the same thing, that we have to think through the differences between equity and equality. And so I went on internet and I went on Google and I said, what are people showing images of these two? And this is the most common image that I found on Google Images around what's equity and equality. And I've seen this image. Yes, it's popular. I get it. I struggled with this image when I was looking at it because I don't think our work in schools to achieve equity is as simple as moving boxes around. I think it's way more complicated than that. I then saw this image and I thought, yeah, in a lot of places, this is probably real. This is the reality in a lot of our schools. And then I found this image. And for a while, I was really happy with it, thinking about someone talking about liberation and that the work's happening, etc. And then I was thinking, but those kids still don't get to play the game, and they're not even in the stands watching. They're on the outs watching. So I still think we're struggling with, what do we mean by equity? What's the outcome? And I think we look at visual information, it helps us think about how the world is portraying it. So I don't think we have a good image yet around equity and equality and what we're trying to accomplish. But the image really bothered me, mostly because I think that the difference being portrayed, the height difference, is a physical or biological difference. And I think that it's not as easy when it's more of a social difference or a race, ethnicity kinds of things. So I think, we're pretty good at addressing the needs of students with physical differences, physical disabilities, but I think we've got other things to realize the promise of equity. Specifically, I think those images can perpetuate a really dangerous narrative that racial equity is about helping people of color and communities of color because we're all inherently and biologically deficient and different. So I don't really like that. I'm worrying about this, how we're visualizing and portraying with images the work of equity. Race, as we know it, has no deterministic biologic basis, yet at the same time, race is so powerful that it has life or death consequences. And it's not as simple as rearranging boxes. That's not the solution to our equity challenges. In the world of literacy, which is where I do most of my work, we've been talking with a bunch of experts around and looking at what is inequitable in the world of literacy. And as an example, there's good evidence, published research that students of color do not have the same opportunities to choose what they want to read as white students. And we know choice increases volume and choice increases motivation and engagement, but we see evidence that students of color do not have the same opportunities to choose what they want to read. Further, students of color do not have the same access to the quantity, quality, or variety of books as white students. We see kids being told they have to read these remedial readers, that they're being told they have to read this one book. So we're struggling with this. Students of color do not have the same opportunities for deep intellectual discussion around text as white students, and many students of color do not see themselves as readers and have not been told the power there is in reading. So I'm just using a literacy example. I could have done writing or mathematics or science, but equity is a challenge and something that we have to focus our resources on, our instructional resources, our equity lenses on if we want to improve. In San Diego, with our school districts here, we had to come to terms with what we meant by the word equity. What is it that we're talking about with equity? And when we first did this, the very first conversation we had with central office leaders, everyone had a different definition of equity. And it took a long time for us to work through what do we mean by equity so that we could allocate time, resources, energy to accomplishing and delivering on the promise of equity. So the first part of our definition that we came up with, and I'm going to present our definition, and you can agree, disagree, revise. My message is not our definition is right. Our definition is shared here, and it helps us think about and work on the challenges. I also think that having a shared definition allows us to communicate when things go right and when things go wrong. So I would encourage your communities to think about what they mean by equity. For us, equity recognizes that every student comes to school with a unique identity profile that is too often impacted by racism, bias, and bigotry. And we're using the Pennsylvania view of identity, so we've adopted this graphic as a way to help teachers think about identity, and that identity is a very complex construct with all of these things getting into a mix with an individual kid. The one criticism I would have of this particular image that we chose in San Diego as our image is that it doesn't have adverse childhood event or trauma on it. And I think those also influence a young person's identity, is if they've experienced trauma or other adverse childhood events, that becomes part of their identity. Second, equity occurs as the result of sensitive, courageous, and creative conversations and actions. Equity requires the distribution and redistribution of resources and initiatives based on individual and group needs derived from multiple sources of qualitative and quantitative data. And equity leads to engaged, inspired, and successful learners. That's our definition. That's how we think about equity. And I think our definition has components that require action. Many times I see school districts have definitions of equity and no one knows what they're supposed to do as a result of that definition of equity. So I hope ours says, here are some things we expect to happen as a result of the inequities that exist right now. So I would encourage you in your groups, in your leadership teams, site level, district level, how are you defining equity? What does it mean to you to think about what does equity mean? How will we accomplish this? To us, that started with our North Star. Where is it that we want to be? If we realize this, what would it be? What would be the top? And we said our job is to facilitate a student body of engaged, inspired, and successful learners. And that's kind of important. I think it's an interesting definition and one that we've negotiated through because it wasn't just about the achievement gap. The achievement gap is part of the equity challenge. But as we've been talking about here in San Diego, it's not just the achievement gap. There are students who are not engaged in their learning. They don't have aspirations. They don't know how to realize those aspirations. They're not inspired. They're not engaged. They're not successful. So we did not want to frame it only as an equity gap issue. So our North Star is this, that we want a student body that is engaged, inspired, and successful. And that's what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to build this, like, how will we allocate resources to get there? That then resulted in this taxonomy. How will we allocate time, resources, energy to get those engaged, inspired, and successful learners? And for us, it started with physical integration, that our kids around other kids. So if you go to the lunchroom, where do you see people sitting? When you look in classrooms, where are people? And are they ability grouped or gender grouped or grouped on ethnicity? So physical integration for us is a baseline. It's hard to realize equity if there's not some ability of kids to interact with other people. But that's not enough. On top of that, we talked about social and emotional engagement, that there's a level of social and emotional learning that facilitates equity. We'll talk about each of these in a little bit more detail soon. That there have to be opportunities to learn for students, that there has to be instructional excellence so that we end up with engaged, inspired, and successful learners. Students have a voice, they have aspirations, and they become assessment capable. And when we did our inventory using this taxonomy, we noticed that some districts focused on only one or two of these, that we had no one that was focused on all levels of this taxonomy. And it was a really interesting conversation. It's like one district was so invested in social and emotional learning, but when you walk the classrooms, there was not instructional excellence happening. In another district, it was all about getting kids into AP courses, open access to AP. The problem was they weren't all, not all the needs were met, social emotional needs and instructional needs were not all met, so that students could actually achieve. And some of the outcomes of open access in this district were a whole bunch of Fs in AP courses. So we saw districts working on one or maybe two, but not all 5 levels. And so we're arguing that to really deliver equity, you need to work on all 5 of these levels. And we've built tools and self-assessments and things for each of these levels. The outputs of this work should be things like better achievement, better attendance, discipline, graduation, language acquisition, social emotional growth. All the things we care about should be outputs of this. They are not the goals. The goal, the North Star for us, is engaged, inspired, and successful learners. So let's start there. So it's more than achievement. It's more than closing the achievement gap. It's about understanding students' voices and their aspirations. Who do you want to be and what do you want to be? That becomes a really important part. And we have to ask students more often, are you proud of yourself? Can you say that? Can you say, I like who I am? Can you look in the mirror and smile at who you see? Is school helping you discover what life is all about? Is school a place that's helping you plan your future? So we have these 25 statements that we ask students all over our county to get a sense of, is their school realizing that promise? Are the students engaged, inspired, and becoming successful? Yes, we do watch the achievement. Yes, we have a dashboard that color codes their level of achievement. But equally importantly, we want to make sure students are engaged and inspired, that our North Star is there. We then think about instructional excellence. So how are the experiences in classrooms facilitating outcomes or outputs of equity? And those of you who know me and know my work, this is where I hang out a lot. I do a lot of work on instructional excellence, although I recognize we need to have all of these levels if we're going to have the outcomes we hope for. And those of you who know me know I've been working on this gradual release of responsibility model for many, many years, going back to 1998. We've been at it a really long time. It's not rocket science, but it's just not done every day. So I'll start with collaborative as an example. Student-to-student interaction. Students should be talking to each other, interacting, and producing work every day. That is an expectation we have. Unfortunately, not in all classrooms does it actually occur. But every day there should be some opportunity for students to interact and talk and use academic language. I think collaboration allows for consolidation of understanding. And I think consolidation is important before students go to practice independently. If I go up one to guided instruction, that's where we prompt and cue and question, where we guide the thinking of students. Using those prompts and cues and questions, we don't just tell them information. If I go one above that, focused is what we call it. It's where we set the purpose for learning and we model our thinking. And I talked a lot about that at the conference in January. We spent a lot of time on that. But every single day, kids should know what they're learning. They shouldn't have to guess. And they should hear teachers model for them. And then all the way to the bottom, students should practice and apply what they've been taught. This is not rocket science. These 4 moves are not that complicated. There's no, I mean, they've been around for decades. It's just they're not happening. We don't always see this instructional excellence happening, this design of intentionality where kids are being guided in their thinking, supported, and responsibility is then released. And I want to talk a little bit about grouping, because I think this is an illustration of what I'm thinking about with instructional excellence. So this is a research study on kindergarten classrooms, thousands and thousands of kids, and the researchers identified 4 types of teachers. I'm going to give them names, but there are 4 types of teachers. And there are hundreds of classrooms with each of these types, but there are 4 kinds of teachers. Type 1, we'll call her Miss Campbell, uses whole group instruction with some small group learning as a permanent ability group. So if it's a whole class, they're teaching the whole class, and if not, the English learners are in a homogeneous group. Classroom 2, Mr. Andrews uses whole group instruction with heterogeneous small groups, so that English learners are spread around in the different groups. 3, This teacher uses whole group instruction and both homogeneous and heterogeneous small group learning for students. And then the fourth kind of teacher uses whole class instruction only. That's always the way I've done it, and I'm not going to change it now. So when you look at these four grouping practices, and we tend to say teachers can group their students however they want, kind of a hands-off policy, these have profound influences on learning. The achievement of 3,748 English learners in kindergarten, with other kids in the classroom, but 3,700 English learners, was predicted based on two things: the teacher perceptions of their students' math abilities and how they grouped. And that's a challenge for me, because if we're talking about instructional excellence and we know that the grouping strategies that teachers use can reduce learning, we have to confront that. It results in inequitable outcomes for students. The middle two were the best two grouping practices: heterogeneous groups or mixed heterogeneous homogeneous groups. What didn't work were permanent ability groups or only whole class instruction. Now, you probably all knew that before I said it. You could have predicted that outcome. And yet when we walk classrooms, we still see all four of those grouping patterns being used with differential outcomes for kids. I want to talk about perceptions for just a minute as well. So it's not just the instruction, it's also the teacher's perceptions about their students. Perceptions are powerful. They influence us, they influence all of us. I was talking to someone about perceptions, and they're saying, well, I think we should focus on instruction, not on perceptions. And I was talking about this book I was reading on team building, and there was a chapter on this company called Colgate, and Colgate was making new products, trying to get more market share, and they invented portable dental floss. And nobody would buy it. We didn't perceive a need for a little box of dental floss with a little spinner wheel and a little thing to rip it off. It didn't sell. So Colgate had to work to change the perception of people to sell their product. And they had this, ad with this yucky brown stuff in his teeth, and buy our product and your life will be better. And there's red sauce in his teeth, and buy our product. And there's spinach in his teeth, and buy our product. It worked. It changed the perception that people had, and they ended up making a lot of money. But I'm going to ask you a different question. Can you count her fingers for me? Most of you missed that when I first showed you this same picture. It's called the priming effect. I told you a story, I primed you. And by priming you, your brain paid attention to things that were consistent with the story. And you ignored some things that are now pretty obvious. It happens to all of us. Every one of us is being primed all the time. But I worry that we're being primed to accept low expectations from certain groups of students. That because of our pasts and the society and whatever, we're primed to not expect certain kids to achieve at high level. And then they don't. Can you tell me where that hand is coming from? Pretty bizarre. She must be very good at yoga. And look at his ear missing. In all of those cases, there's now a pretty obvious omission or photoshopped element, but we miss it when we're primed, because teacher perceptions become students' realities. If we don't have high expectations and then align our instruction to those expectations, our students won't learn. And I worry that we're not spending enough time talking about perceptions and how to address or confront that priming effect that inevitably happens to all of us. But students have to have those opportunities to learn. They need access to the curriculum. They need to develop those opportunities and be given those opportunities to have experiences. Like, I don't think there's a problem with the district saying we want to open up AP enrollment, but doing that by itself is probably not going to have the outputs or outcomes we're looking for. Yes, I care about opportunities to learn, but I think we need to think it in context of other things that we're doing in a system. We require that principals analyze their master schedule for equity and inequity, and that they talk with their supervisors, the principal supervisor, assistant superintendent, about what inequities exist in the master schedule. Because the master schedule is your belief system, your philosophy, how you're operationalizing your values. And some people just let the master schedule go. And some of you have a master schedule where there's one class and that's all there is. I understand that, especially in more of the rural parts of Alaska. But if you look at the master schedule, you will see decisions that are being made. How is time being allocated? How are students being assigned to classes? Who gets access to which classes? That we should be analyzing opportunities to learn in the master schedule. It should be part of our normal operating procedure each spring when we build the master schedule to look at inequities that exist in that schedule. In addition, the big area for us now, our growing area, is around social emotional engagement, social emotional learning. It's no longer just a character ed or character building curriculum. In the old days, we would have said, character ed is the social emotional program. And I think we're seeing a much more expansive social emotional engagement where we're looking at cultural proficiency and the environment is welcoming and how relationships are being built and formed and maintained and how invitational people are, teachers are, and whether or not they understand how to restore harm when it is done. I think social emotional is way bigger now. Our view of social emotional learning are these 5 tenets, these 5 major areas. Nancy and Dominique and I read several hundred studies on social emotional learning, and some of you might have gone to his session at the conference, and we organized that research into these 5 areas. And so there are other people who've organized it in different ways. You'll see some overlap and some non-overlap, but we had to organize it for ourselves. What do we mean by social emotional learning? So for example, is the teacher building students' agency and identity? Are we recognizing strengths in students? Are we building their confidence and their efficacy? Are we working on resiliency? And then resiliency when things are awful, where it's not resiliency, it's resistance. I mean, there's just all kinds of work to do in agency and identity. But that's only one of the 5 areas. We also talked about emotional regulation, cognitive regulation, how to build social skills and relationships. And what's fairly unique, because it's not in most SEL models, is what we call public spirit. Getting students engaged in their community, doing things that are good for themselves, their families, their communities, their schools, whatever. So it's in an area of outcome for social emotional learning that a lot of places aren't recognizing. And I think we should have school situations where we build public spirit, because I think that also builds empathy, that's an important part of the outcome of public spirit. So we can spend a way more time. Someday maybe you'll invite me back and we'll do a whole session just on social emotional learning. But one of the things I worry about in elementary schools are these clip charts. And the clip charts are public humiliation of kids. And they cause a lot of shame where students, they're called out in front of everyone. And I talk about clip charts every once in a while. And I want to be careful, because if you go back and throw away the clip chart and the kids are used to that, their behavior will probably go crazy. We have to have replacements for the clip charts. And I know some people get super mad at me right now because clip charts are their classroom management tool. But when you watch kids and the frustration and the anger when they get called out in a public way, I think we need to be careful. There's people writing about that, including Dominique, about how can we get rid of the clip charts so we're not publicly humiliating kids for their behavior, public control of them. I think these clip charts also compromise the relationship that the teacher has with the student. And the kids being called out all the time is going to start to dislike that teacher. We should also think about emotions and the emotional life of students and how we help them understand the emotion and the natural ways that humans respond to those emotions. We like this one. There are many visuals of emotions. I like this one a lot. I think it helps students understand the range of emotions they can experience and the scaling of emotions and how we think through those. This is Walter Perky's work on invitational teaching. I think it's fascinating. It's several decades old, and it says that some teachers are intentionally inviting, and that's where we want people to be, very intentionally inviting. But there's some teachers who are intentionally uninviting. And those people need to work. I mean, they need to change their interactions with kids. They're harsh, they're alienating, they're vindictive. And this happens. And we all can point to teachers we know who are intentionally uninviting. The unintentionally uninviting teachers can change a little bit easier. I mean, that they don't mean to be uninviting, but they come across as uninviting. And you all, I don't recommend you do this right this minute, but you all could put names, yourself and other names in all these boxes. But the thing is, how do we help people become more intentionally inviting? At our school, I'm particularly worried about the unintentionally inviting, the blue box. They're enthusiastic and positive, but not consistent. and they're naive, they're laissez-faire, and students really don't like that. The other people who write about this talk about warm demanders. Yes, there's a demand and expectation, but you're warm about it. You're intentionally inviting. And if you read Walter Perkey's work, you'll see that there are actions we can take in each of these areas to help people become more intentional and more inviting in their practices. The last area I won't spend much time on is physical integration. And some of your schools, that there are, because there's only one classroom or two classrooms, but I think we should look at the other environments that our students are in and look at the integration. I mean, I do think racial integration was an important move in this country. It just wasn't enough. And we're seeing resegregation now, and I struggle with that. I think we have to think about how to get kids being educated alongside a wide range of peers. If we're going to have the equity deliver, and we want equitable outcomes, we have to talk about integration, the social emotional learning of our students. Are we providing them opportunities to learn? Is the instruction excellent? And are we recognizing their voice and their aspirations and having students start to own their learning? So that's my 30 minutes. I'm going to pause there. If there are some questions, we can certainly do that. So yeah, on my website, go to fisherandfry.com, hit contact, and I'm happy to get the presentation out to anybody who wants it. It'll be a Dropbox link because the images are way too big for your email accounts.
I'm just letting everybody know, as we've mentioned, this session is being recorded. So on our website, we will have an opportunity where you can actually watch this recording, and then any resources, including Doug's presentation as well. So I just want to take a few moments to open it up to the group. If Doug doesn't mind, we have a few minutes, very short minutes. If anybody has a question for Doug or the group, we're going to open the floor now. You just unmute yourself, and then you can ask the question.
Kate Williams from Cordova Senior High has a question. How might you start a conversation with teachers about invitational teaching from a principal's perspective?
Yeah, we've done this a few times in a few schools, and I like to start with, here's the Walter Perkey model, and ask people where they feel they are. I think some people recognize right away, oh, I'm not as inviting as I mean to be. And I did highlights in that grid. His articles and his book have way more detail about what you're looking for in intentional inviting, you know, invitational teaching, he calls it. But I start with people having self-assessment. And then sometimes I say to people, I don't think you mean to do this, but you're coming across as very uninviting. I think it's unintentional, but here's how the students are perceiving you. I'm more comfortable with that one. The intentionally uninviting people are very difficult. They're usually bitter and angry about their work. And so we have to figure out what caused that. Why are you that way? And how can we help you move forward? It's usually something different and other. And if you read Walter's work, you'll see that there's a lot of other things, personal traumas, other things that get people into that intentionally uninviting place.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for Doug? Just trying to make that, you know, not jumping into the silence. So just one more time. Okay. So thank you, Doug. We really appreciate your presentation. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Wave your hands for applause. So thank you. So I am just going to move forward on the next component of Echo Session. I'm going to share my screen. And so as we know, the structure of a session is the same way each time. The content will change. And the next component is called the case presentation, the problem of practice. And so this is what a lot of people call the secret sauce of an Echo session. And so what it means is, it's not new to learning communities for sure, but it is what makes us different than a webinar. And so there is a process that we like to do with our Echo sessions. We want real live time problems and challenges from our participants. We don't want to take from case studies. We don't want to imagine it or create it or script it. We want real-time challenges that you guys and your colleagues are facing in your day-to-day work. And so what we're going to do is we have a process in place. We can't just afford to have in a session someone put up their hand and say, I have a problem, and then we just attack it. We need to have a process in place behind the scenes. And Kate Williams from Cordova had a really good example of what a problem of practice would be. It's that kind of individualistic challenge that you might be facing. It could be about a student, it could be about a group of students, it could be about your team, your staff team. It could be about a program or an initiative that you're facing, that you're struggling with. It could be an ethical concern that you're tackling. These are all examples of problems of practice. And so what we do is we ask participants to, and I'm gonna, okay, Doug has shared it in the chat box, is there is a form that we ask individuals to fill out. And what happens is that form comes only to the ECHO team, and we gather the information from the person that has that problem. So we're just gathering what is the problem, what's some background information that the group may need to know, what's some strategies they've already tried. And what we do on this end is we develop a narrative. We de-identify the information that's provided to us because we know in this state, of course, especially our small rural districts, we can take out names, we can take out situations, but we really have to be careful that those small districts, we could be taking out all the names possible, that we know that we're talking about that individual. Some of our schools are really extremely small. So we take the time to de-identify the information that we've received and we create a narrative. That narrative is what's shared with the group. And so the narrative is shared, and then we open it up to the group for conversation. So then the group can provide recommendations, you know, any strategies they may have tried. I've also been in sessions where people have said, that's not my problem, but I've tried this and it didn't work in another problem. It's just really brainstorming ideas, allowing that individual to gather some information and feel support as they're challenged with this problem. Now, in education, it seems like in the medical field, that is easy. The person, maybe it has to do with rounds, I'm assuming people are really familiar with this process. They have no problem sharing their problem of practice to the group. But what we're finding in education, and not just here, but in education ECHO projects across the United States, this is not unfamiliar, but for whatever reason, educators struggle with feeling maybe a little vulnerable and presenting their problem of practice to their peers. So we want people to feel safe. We're going to create, our goal is to create a community of safety, a culture of safety, so people do eventually feel safe to do so. But we want to present or allow people to offer their case presentation in 4 different ways. One is, and ideally, we'd love you with the problem to present your problem of practice to the group. Now, that's probably not the norm, and so we do encourage maybe you want to collaborate with a colleague and present together. Sometimes it's safety in numbers. The other way is you can work with us, the ECHO team, and we can present anonymously. So how does that work? People say, well, how does that work? Well, we work with the person behind the scenes. We develop the narrative. We present on behalf. They might be in the virtual room with us, but we're using the private chat. And so if there's questions or comments, we can talk behind the scenes and still allow that person to gather the information, and we can still have a discussion about the problem. And then, you know, sometimes people are more comfortable with flipping it, presenting a story of success. So that's another option as well. As we know, success usually starts with a problem that's, you know, improved over time. So those are the 4 options. We really want these problems of practice to come from you, the participants, and for future participants in our sessions. We know that for the first couple sessions that are going to be happening in the next couple weeks, people don't know to know yet. So we do have some. They're not fake. We've contacted principals. They're really providing their problems of practice. So for the first couple sessions, you will see them being role modeled, so you get an idea. But we encourage you, or you can promote that link there in the chat box. I'll show you in another way where you can access the link. And we want those problems really from the participants that are on the scene, in the schools, in their district, struggling. So does anybody really quickly have any questions or comments regarding the problem of practice? You guys are a really shy group today, really shy. That's okay.
So I'll do one. This is Dina, if that's okay.
Well, sure, Dina, you can. You can also, we don't usually have it right at the moment.
Oh, no, I don't want a problem of practice. I just want maybe for a discussion.
Sure.
But I guess I should have done it when Doug was on. You know, like schools and districts and classrooms, all the way down to the individual teacher, has 100 different things to think about. And, you know, the pyramid that Doug shared is, there's no argument. It's just in the given time frame and what we need to focus on. I was wondering if he, and maybe we can ask him later, like, I know he said everything's important, and you know the thing that he's an expert in is the instruction, but what would he suggest we start working on first? Because again, I don't know that our principals can have one more thing that we do, you know, that they have to think about. But you know, but if it could fit within our work presently, then it'll seem seamless. And I was just curious about that. And that might be back for Doug. I should have done it earlier. Sorry.
I'm not sure if Doug is still on the line, to be honest.
No, he got off.
I think he ran away. So we can definitely pose that to him, and we can share that where we have the recording posted.
So I recorded that Doug said that he would come back if we invited him. I wrote that down, so we'll make sure that we get Doug back on. And he was really impressed with this sort of a format when we talked to him last time. So I think we'll be able to get him to come back and find. That's a great question. Where would you start? You know, what would we do to begin that discussion?
All right. So the next component of the session format is the announcements. And this is where is kind of what is next. What are we looking forward to next? And so one of the key things is we want right now people to understand that we have sessions already ready to go. Within our 5 networks, you can access and register for those sessions already if you access our website at echoeducationak.com. And Doug has just Mark has just put that in the chat box. I can show you really quickly in live time, and everybody can do this as well. So can everybody see that if you aren't there already? So this is just the home page, but what we're talking about is we already have upcoming Echo sessions. Our tab right here, you can either do a drop down and go on to the 5 networks, check them out. For example, we already have them listed. How you can register, the link is right there. Who will be presenting, what is the topic. Even if you're running late, you can join the current session at the time. If it's not happening right at the moment, you're going to get a screen that says this isn't happening right at this moment. So you'll know right away if the current session isn't happening. So that's one example. Also, one of our innovation facilitators here in the room, Mark.
You got to click on the upcoming.
Also created below an actual Google folder. So every date, depending on the date, you can click on it. There's the presenter, there's the topic, and then there's the registration link. So just for example, this one will take you right to the registration link. You input your information and you register for the session. So that's just an example. We really encourage you to go to our website, check it out, check out what's happening in those sessions, and start registering. And please, please communicate to your staff, your colleagues. We want to make sure that everybody is aware.
And I would also add to Carrie's comment that you can join sessions without registering. It's just, it's very helpful to us in terms of the evaluation component. And we track every piece of detail to this to report to funders so that they know the usage of it and the success of it or lack thereof. So our funders get accurate data to determine what they wish to do down the road. So registration is very helpful for us, but you can still get it. And one thing we haven't said a lot, but at the bottom of your screen, there's a little button that says invite. And you can just click on that and send an email to your colleagues or your friends who you don't see online, who you think they should have heard Doug Fischer. This is good stuff. You can send that invite directly to them, and that it populates into their Outlook, and they can click on it and go live right there. So it's a way to invite people even while the session is underway. So you can still get there without registering, but of course that's our preference, is that you register.
Sure. The other thing is that we are using a marketing software called Constant Contact. If some of you are familiar with it, another parallel would be MailChimp. So you will be receiving in your inbox a monthly and a weekly notice of all the sessions as well. It will be coming from the person will be Alaska Education Network, or Z_Echo will be the email address. So you will be receiving that in your inbox. Now, what can happen is sometimes it recognizes, depending on your situation or your district, it might recognize it as spam, so check your spam. If you do have connections with your IT department, you can ask them to whitelist Constant Contact, so it helps it to keep it out of the spam. But those will be coming to your inbox as well. Every principal in the state, every superintendent in the state, and then other partners will receive that as well. So that you can go to our website to register and find out about sessions, but you'll also be receiving it in your email inbox.
Last of all, for announcements, I know we have some people from the Department of Education online. Are there any announcements from the state? Anything that anyone regarding the state or anyone else would have regarding anything upcoming that would be of interest to this group? Anybody got a great conference coming up you want to plug? Anything that would help build expertise in our state?
And as you're thinking about that, as you're going to see in the chat box, there is a link to an evaluation. If you wouldn't mind taking a minute, it's really, really short. This will happen with every session as well. It helps us to get feedback regarding this session so we can tweak it and make it better as we move forward. So that evaluation for this session link is in the chat box. So I understand from Beverly Hardesty, there's a special ed conference that has Jessica Sprick speaking, so that is coming up.
That would be of great interest to our student behavior group for sure.
Anybody else like to share anything that's happening?
AST is going on as we speak, right? I'm looking right here at our IT folk, our ed techs. Well, anything else?
I don't have anything else unless anybody else out there does.
I want to thank everyone for coming out on your holiday. I'm just impressed that we've had well over 40 people online today just to hear Doug and to have an orientation to this on a day when you could have been skiing or something. So thank you so much for spending your morning with us, and we look forward to seeing you on the very next ECHO session that we have. So thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate, thank you for attending today. We really appreciate that if you would help us promote this project, invite someone to a session, let them know what's happening, direct them to our website. We would really appreciate that.
And Kim says she's actually at the conference. So this is the cool part of this technology. Some of you are actually at the conference and you joined us from there. So awesome.
Yes.
Thank you. We'll see you all.
And then we do have a person on the line that called in 1-206-501-5439. Would you be willing to just let us know who you are and where you're from? And then also there's another call-in user. We're not exactly sure. It doesn't have a number attached to it. You could just let us know who you are. That would be greatly appreciated. And goodbye to everyone else. Have a great rest of the holiday. here in Anchorage, we had a little shaker this morning that just reminds us that we're not quite over our little shaking incident here in Anchorage, so it woke me up. Okay, thank you everybody. Have a great day.